Is he good? He's probably fine. He ain't coming in here. He had never come in yet. I know, but
There we go.
he's saying he's gonna do that because he's gonna mess with that.
Hey, I'll be happy if you decide to join.
That's that boy.
I wonder if they can. All right, let's see. Let's see if they can hear us now. This is always the worst part. All right, this is that waiting to see if anybody else is actually going to hear us or if they can see us or speak or anything. So we will do this. All right. We got a whopping one person on, so that's good. Go ahead and talk. Let me hear.
Hey, can you hear me at all?
I don't know. That's a good question. I wonder if I turn this. If I turn that on.
Can you hear me now?
Try not going through that. That's all right. You have to pull up on something else. I hate this part. I hope everyone knows how much I hate this part. I'd rather just talk. By the way, this is an open forum.
Discussion.
Yeah, open discussion. We're pretty relaxed here, so we get to do whatever here. We can talk about whatever we can.
Man, it's way behind. Way behind.
Yeah, that's the worst part.
We're pretty relaxed.
Yeah, we can hear. All right, good. All right, we have a couple extra guests here as you guys are joining us. Yeah, don't concentrate on the video part. I have this pulled up mostly for the chat part, so, maybe enjoy that. That's usually at least a little bit quicker, but got a couple guests here. Some refuse to be on camera. Even a little bit. Oh, there you go. Awesome. Oh, look. Not so good. Let's get you at least in there somewhere. Oh, yeah. This is great. All right, if you're joining us, this is our lunchtime Q A. The reason we're doing this basically gives an opportunity for those who maybe the hour-long discussion that we had Sunday night wasn't good enough to clarify some of the answers, or you've come up with more questions. I know, Joe, you weren't able to be there Sunday night, which is perfectly okay. We didn't even touch Joseph, so he didn't really miss anything. And so, but this is kind of an open forum to discuss really anything. It doesn't have to be anything about Joseph. It could be just Bible questions you have in general, like certain elements. I don't claim to be an expert in any way. You should probably go to
more of an expert than
you should probably go to Jason or something if you really want some expert advice. But I do love Scripture, and as we wait for a couple more people to join, which who knows if they will or not. I probably wouldn't if I were them. Anyways, overall, Scott, I know we kind of had a discussion yesterday a little bit. What was your thoughts about our first kind of session, about what we did? Did you find any of it interesting? Did you?
Absolutely did, and just from the discussion afterwards, people were interested in going down some of the rabbit holes that you didn't want to go through.
Yeah.
In your discussion, and you said that would probably take hours away from the class.
Yeah, some of the rabbit holes that we would have gone down maybe would have been whole classes themselves, unfortunately. Joe, to kind of fill you in, we went from, in order to read the Joseph narrative and to understand like what's happening there, you have to understand like the foundation that's been set up in Genesis. And so what we did is we kind of started in Genesis 1 and we just moved forward all the way to Genesis 37. And we kind of were hitting major themes and things that would be really pertinent to once we begin reading Genesis 37 with the Joseph narrative. Suddenly things that seem to be really confusing or seem out of place or whatever. It's purposefully being like all these themes are being packed into these passages, and there's very much a purpose behind what it's being said, and it's, I don't know, you get stuck into basically the child storybook version of reading, these stories, and so you hear the Joseph story, you're like, okay, well, he gets sold into slavery, becomes elevated in second command, and saves people through famine and whatnot. And so you kind of that's about as far as you go. So then once you start to read the Joseph narrative, maybe as an adult, we're so kind of arrogant we kind of just start reading it and we fill in the blanks and we kind of skip over parts because we're like, yeah, okay, we got this part. We got it. Joseph needs to be faithful, remains faithful. God, honors that faithfulness. And it's unfortunate, I think, sometimes. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I think it's unfortunate we do that sometimes because we really miss just some of the rich, complex, and honestly, seemingly opposite morals of the story than what we happen to come to. I know we kind of talked about that a little bit in Jonah, in the Jonah class and stuff. And so, I don't know. I'm interested to hear if there was something specific that came to mind that you're like, I heard somebody say that we should go down at least one of those rabbit holes. Or if you're in the chat, more people are joining up now, it looks like. So if you're in the chat, make sure you just throw up there at any point. Just if you have questions about one of the rabbit holes, or if you want to talk about anything about the Bible, we can do that. We've got about an hour to spare. And if you don't want to hear me mumble on trying to fill the space.
Well, I know one of the things Wade and I have already discussed about in Genesis, on the sixth day, man was created, and then in chapter 2, it's talking about Adam and Eve were created. Well, was there some man that was created before Adam and Eve? Mm-hmm. And then if you read in later, and it's talking about when Cain was actually cast out, he was worried about they're going to kill me. Well, if it's only Adam, Eve, and Cain, who was he worried about killing him? That's telling me that Cain thought there was other people. Yes,
this is the age-old question of were there other people on Earth when God created everything? So let me just go ahead and go to Genesis chapter 1. Many of you have heard different viewpoints. I don't claim to say like, hey, this is the view or not. I don't want to. I'd rather just kind of lay out kind of the viewpoints of what's going on here. So in Genesis chapter 1, we've got the creation of everything. On day 6, we see that he's going to come and he's going to bring forth all the living creatures according to their kinds. Yes, that's going to be behind, by the way. Sorry. All the creeping things. And then on the second part of day 6, he's going to make man in our image, after our likeness. And when you read this, depending on which version of the Bible you've got, you're going to see maybe a little, kind of, you can hover over this little triangle drop down menu thing. You can click on that and you'll see at the bottom, not that you can read this here, but at the bottom, Bible, right now I'm in stepbible.org. Yep. You can do this pretty much at any Bible that you want to. You'll see at the bottom says the Hebrew word for man, Adam, is the generic term for mankind. In fact, one of the things that you can do here in Step Bible is you can pull up another reference or a different version. I mean, and so like let's just pull up NIV or something like that. Now you'll be able to see down here at the end. You'll see right here is going to pull up a parallel version of both the ESV and the NIV. And you'll see the NIV just chooses to, instead of say, let us make man, it chooses to go ahead and say, let us make mankind. The reason why is because this is not, there's one single, there's one little tiny dash that separates Genesis 1:26 from what we're about to see in Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis chapter 2, not 3. In Genesis chapter 2, we're going to see when there was no bush in the field, and there was no small plant in the field. They hadn't sprung up because God hadn't caused it to rain. We're going to see him form man out of the dust of the ground and breathe life into the nostrils, the breath of life. He's going to become a living creature. So there's a couple issues with this here. According to Genesis chapter 1, the brush of the field, the bushes, they were made on day 3. Then on day 6, the second part of day 6, man was made. So now you have to come to the very next chapter, and it says, when specifically there was no bush of the field, because God hadn't caused it to rain yet, he forms man out of the dust and breathes life into him. So are we on day 3? Are we on day 6? Is this a complete contradiction to what's going on? have you heard any of the theories as far as how people can explain this away at all?
Well, I've actually, Wade actually says that this is just rehashing, restating everything that was in. This is, all right, so you've got a generic in one and it's breaking it down into, okay, this is exactly how it happened.
So it's a zoomed in
chapter 2.
version
That's what he
of
said.
what kind of occurred in
And I would buy
the
that,
first chapter.
except for the part where Cain's thrown out and he says, they are going to kill him. And you're like,
Yeah.
who is they?
Yeah.
There's nobody else.
Yeah, right. That's probably one of the leading theories out there, is that this is kind of like a zoomed in version. So like he creates everything. Now we're going to zoom into a land called Eden, and he's going to plant a garden within this land called Eden. So maybe the brush of the field is actually just here in Eden. Like maybe that God hadn't he formed plants. Maybe those are out there, but now he's going to zoom into Eden. There's nothing in this land here specifically. I heard a scholar a couple of years ago say it this way, which actually kind of made a little more sense to me, but I could see an argument for both ways. What he said was ultimately on day 6 of creation, he forms mankind, humanity. And now what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in to Eden, and within Eden, he's going to form the man. And the reason why this here is different is you'll see it doesn't say he formed mankind out of the dust. He says he formed the man. Now in Hebrew, the difference between mankind and the man is ha. It's he. It's basically a dash, and it distinguished a singular versus plural. And so the other theory is that day 6 he forms mankind. Now he's going to zoom in and he's going to form the man. Now notice they don't call him Adam at this point. That does not come until even later. So the reason I think this is a compelling argument, is because he doesn't just form the man, but he also forms the man and then places him in Eden, or in the garden within Eden in the east, where he put him. And out of the ground, God made this garden to spring up, and then he's going to have him work the garden. Now, the words that they're going to use here for he put him in the garden to work it. It's the avad, is this Hebrew word work. This is the same exact language that's going to be used for the priests in the temple and in the tabernacle. They are going to go and they're going to avad. They're going to work. They're going to labor within the temple and the tabernacle. And so what I think is happening is that just like Psalms, we'll call Eden a mountain, like the great mountain, Mount Zion, Eden. It's this picture of that's where heaven and earth meet in the ancient Near East. I think what's happening is that Adam and Eve are placed in here as sort of the picture of the pre-picture of what the priests will be like in the future tabernacle and the temple. They're going to be the ones who will come to the heaven and earth meeting place, and they will as representatives of the rest of mankind, humankind, that's already been created, that's already out in the world at this point, doing whatever. I also think that's a compelling argument simply because, like you were saying, once Cain murders Abel, he's banished further east of Eden, but he's afraid that a bunch of his brothers and sisters are going to murder him, nieces and nephews. It doesn't say, it just says, what if they find me, they're going to kill me, kind of situation. And so it's not necessary to go with this reading of it. I find it somewhat compelling for a little bit more arguments than that. But
since all of this was written by someone who lived maybe thousands of years after this event happened, and this was wholly inspired, but he wasn't there. So that's another reason that he wasn't actually there. So yes, this was wholly inspired, and maybe that's the way it was given to him.
There's a third theory behind this as well that I'll mention, and I'll mention it in passing because this one tends to be more of a hot topic subject for especially Baptists. The third reading of this is that Adam and Eve they were never real people. They're archetypal people. So this is written in almost like a allegorical manner. that mankind could have had it good, but didn't. They fell. And so it's not necessarily a literal chronology or a literal historical account of two people that God formed and literally lived in a garden, but it's Moses's maybe reinterpretation of a legend that he'd heard from surrounding cultures or whatever it may be. And he's rewriting this in here as sort of a polemic against other gods around or other creation myths that were popular of the day. You can kind of work that out. If that's something that makes sense to you, you can kind of, there's some really great scholars you can read on that. I don't like to touch that one because that one has a tendency to be a little more hot topic for people. I think kind of bugs people when they don't like the whole figurative versus literal debates.
So who came up with that, naming the animals and everything, if that's the case? It just...
Yeah, the archetypal Adam and Eve theory is more about like, it wasn't about the naming of the animals. The naming of the animals was really about God presenting all of the potential helpmates for Adam, just to realize that, oh, he's still without a helpmate. Because you'll see before he names the animal, he's gonna say, but there was no helper for Adam. And then he's going to go through and name all the animals. And then at the end of it, he's going to say, the Lord God said, it's not good that man should be alone. I'm going to make him a helper fit. And then out of the ground, he formed every beast of the field, every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. Like, hey, who are you going to call? What are you going to call this one? Are you going to call this one the helper? And you'll notice the next time they mention that is after he puts Adam to sleep, pulls the rib, makes a woman, brought her to the man, the exact same language as bringing the animals to the man. And then that's when man says, this at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She's going to be called woman. So it's almost like he's continuing the act of the calling of the animals, but this one actually will be a helper. And so it wasn't about the naming of the animals per se, but more of there was no helper fit, and God had to form that extra helper for man to call woman, if that makes sense.
It makes sense.
Whether you agree or not.
Total
Yes.
Has anybody written in questions?
Up to this point, Miss Mary Carter is listening on the road.
Okay.
But that's what we see. Hi, Mary. All right. Did that clear that part up?
I think we've already discussed that.
Yeah.
But I think it's debatable. It's you could probably discuss it from now till the cows come home, and you got an opinion, I got one, Joe's got one. Yeah. So I don't think there's a unanimous. Okay, well we'll go with yours.
Lisa Smith says she's listening in the kitchen. That's much safer than on the road. I'm really glad that you're listening in the kitchen. Well, maybe depending on what utensils you're using potentially.
So Lisa is the one that was saying that she wanted to hear about some of these rabbit holes. So I'd be interested to know which rabbit holes in particular that she wanted to go down.
Scott is putting you on the hot seat here, Lisa. I can kick him under the table if you need, but he's much, much bigger than me. I prefer not to do that. I do want to be clear that I don't think I think personally, this is personal opinion now. I think some of these things that are especially hot topic subjects in especially Genesis. I think they were left with a lot of gray area on purpose. Like I think that is a divinely inspired aspect. The moment you pigeonhole 7 literal days into 7 24-hour days, then people who have issue with that or ascribe to maybe like more of an evolutionary type standpoint, somewhere where evolution and the Bible may mix together, then that's going to put them in a box. And the moment you say no, it's 7 figurative days, then the people who think that God made it in 7 literal days is going to kind of put them in a box, and it creates a lot of ambiguity within the gray space of the narratives. And by not both stating and clarifying that, hey, this is literal versus figurative, or it's kind of taking like the Jesus standpoint, where Jesus doesn't go, "Hey, everyone, I'm going to teach you a parable now." Like he's going to tell you a story, one that's going to cause you to have to think things through and to spend the Psalm 1 day and night meditation for the rest of your life, trying to determine how all this fits together in our world and what that means for us, kind of thing. And so I think, it's not as important to determine whether or not who's right in those camps. I think in that gray area, what is important is where the Bible is very clear that division and arguments, the way Titus puts it, avoid foolish controversies and arguments about the law, for they're unprofitable and useless. Like, in other words, like, don't get caught up in the weeds. Like, you're missing the point of this. If you want to believe it's a literal 7 24-hour day period or 7 age period, that's like, we'll know one day. Like, praise God for that. But that wasn't the clarity that God wanted to speak into that, because he didn't want us to get caught up in the weeds. Luckily, he knows us a lot better than we do. And we can really get caught up in some weeds where it's unnecessary, unfortunately.
So yesterday we had an interesting discussion on Job, and when Job actually happened, and then did it actually happen, or is it a parable where Job represents, I think you said Jesus is what we decided to land.
This is one of those weeds. You'll hear from, there'll be 10 scholars, 5 of them will tell you that this is the oldest book in the Bible. The other 5 will say, no, it's not. So you have to kind of go, about that. So I know what led us into that discussion yesterday was you wanted to kind of know where I felt Job landed in a linear timeline. Was it did Job occur pre-flood? Did it post-flood? And I want to say it carefully. If you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I would have probably stated a totally different answer. So I think this is one of those gray areas. Scholars believe that Job probably did exist. He probably was known as a pretty wise sage of the time. Whether Job was, a real individual or more of a legend that was written down in more of a allegorical manner, it's just not clear. The reason I say that is because, again, we start the narrative of Job out in a council meeting in the heavens, where the Satan is going to be presenting what he's been doing as God's going around in this divine council meeting, and God's going to look at him and say, from where have you come? Satan's going to be like, I came from to and fro, and he's going to go, well, have you looked at Job? So when you read this as when you pigeonhole this story into, again, a literal interpretation, you have to go, man, it just seems pretty harsh that God's going to let this all happen to this innocent man, right? Now, Job is going to be called righteous and blameless. There's only like one other person in the Old Testament that's called that, and that's Noah, right? And if you go back to the story of Noah, you're going to see that the righteous and blameless Noah, who faithfully builds an ark, gets on the ship, gets off the ship, builds an altar, sacrifices the animals like he knew how to do, even though none of that had been written down yet. Question. God is then at that point going to look down and make a covenant with Noah and say, I'm never going to flood the earth again, because now I know that every intention of man's heart is evil continuously. And you as a reader, if you're not careful, you will skip over that pretty quickly. But what you didn't catch was that's how the narrative of Noah starts. It says that the wickedness of mankind had come up before God, and God sees that all the intentions of man's heart is evil continuously. But there's Noah, the righteous and blameless one. Now, the righteous and blameless one did everything right, got off the ship, sacrificed to the Lord. It's a pleasing aroma. And then God says, now I know that every intention of man's heart. So you're supposed to stop as the reader and go, but Noah he didn't do anything. What do you mean? Like, he did it right. This is where you're supposed to go. Now I know, Noah, you're the guy. You did it. You overcame it, right? And then when you read it that way, and the very next thing is that Noah plants a garden, partakes in fruit, ends up naked. You go, oh no, there is literally no hope for mankind here. Thank God, God just made a covenant with him not to destroy the whole earth like that again, like through a flood. So now you're going to get to Job, and you're going to read that Job was righteous and blameless, and you're filling in the blanks like we happen to do, and we're going to go, oh no, like it's going to be because he's unrighteous. It's because of every intention of his heart is wicked, which is the argument that his friends are going to have all throughout the book of Job. And if you read the end of Job, in fact, we'll just go there real quick. If you read the end of Job, God only hollers at one thing at the end of this. So Job, he's lost everything. He's had a wife that says you should just curse God. He's got friends who are like, you must have sinned and done something. You need to get this right, blah, blah, blah. Job stands before God and says, you need to, answer for what's going on. This is unfair. God, tell me what's going on. God shows up in a whirlwind, and he's like, do you feed the mouth of lions? And, can you do these things? And Job is literally humbled to the point he's like, you're right. Basically doesn't give an answer as to why it happened. And then you're going to see the Lord rebukes somebody, but not Job. He doesn't rebuke Job for demanding any of this. He rebukes his friends twice. He says, my anger burns against you and your friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right. He's talking to Eliphaz. And then he tells him he's got to go and sacrifice these animals. And then he's going to say it again, for you have not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job. So you've just read this whole narrative that's taken place. And the logical conclusion, based off of the Noah standpoint of Noah being righteous and blameless, but now God knows he's wicked and evil continuously, you get to the next righteous and blameless one, and you're going to see he didn't do anything wrong either. And you're left questioning in this wisdom literature book, what is the outcome of sin? And what's the appropriate way to look at the bad things that happen in life, right? And it's not always because it's not as simple as saying, hey, you're sinful and broken, so you're going to have bad stuff happen to you. That's not as simple as that. It's just God's ways are his ways, our ways are ours, unfortunately. And ultimately, I think what you see is you're seeing a picture in this Job of no matter what, it wasn't the outcome of what Job did that made him lose everything. But in the middle of Job, you see, I think it's Job 13, it says, though you slay me, yet I will hope in the Lord, yet I will praise you. You're going to see a picture of a righteous and blameless one who did nothing to deserve losing everything, but in his faithfulness is allotted for a double portion of return to him. And it's this pre-picture of Christ, right? It's this picture. It's just ever increasingly, a clearer picture of what Jesus will be. So when was Job written? I don't know. Was he a real person? I don't know. Is it allegorical? I don't know.
Who was attributed to writing it?
I don't know.
They don't know that?
I have no idea.
And then they probably weren't around for this anyway.
Going off memory, don't quote me on this, but I think that because it's considered wisdom literature in the Hebrew scriptures and the Tanakh and stuff like that, they think maybe Solomon wrote it. Because when you read this, it very much fits a lot of the like philosophical type arguments. It's setting something in front of you that seems like one thing, but as you're reading it, if you dwell on it a little bit, you go, this has a lot of more philosophical type undertones than maybe you realized originally.
So, all right, we talked about that they never said there was anybody. What about Enoch? Enoch was taken into heaven, and he said he lived for the Lord.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't say he was righteous and blameless. It says that he walked with God all the days of his life until God took him. And even Elijah, who it says the same thing, which is, it's so funny to me that when you look at these narratives, everybody knows Elijah. Like everybody knows Elijah, right? But Elisha does double what Elijah did. So why do we remember Elijah and not Elisha, generally speaking? Maybe that's just me, but I feel like because he was taken to heaven, just like whatever Enoch, the one verse we get on Enoch, where you're like, wait, I need more of this. What do you mean he was taken? What does this mean?
And the death of Elisha is like a after note in the middle of talking about three kings, and you're like, wait a minute, I never
Yep.
remembered the story of how he died, and he just died, and there was one line attributed to it, and that's the only thing you hear about it.
Yep. Very interesting. Hi to the people in the ones Carolyn Wilkins class, Jason, Linda Broussard. Oh, hi, Linda.
This is not something I've seen before, but in that it said Job died an old man and full of days. Does that mean he lived forever with the Lord?
It just means he lived he continued to live a long life.
Well, it said that he lived 140 years just before that, and then they made this distinction, and Job died an old man and full of days. So I guess I don't understand what that is.
It's just he's just saying that it's just like doubling down on the fact that Job lived a long, happy life even after this. Like he was still ripe, according to this cross reference here in 526. He was a ripe old age when he died. He didn't die before he was too young or whatever.
Well, this is just again. I've read Job probably 4 times, and since you've been doing your Bible study, I'm starting to see things that I never paid attention to before, and I just saw that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, there could be more there. I'm not a Job expert, that's for sure. But make sure y'all, if y'all are here in the chat, if you have questions or want clarifications about anything, make sure you put that in there. We'll get to it. We got about a 20-second delay between what we say and finally seeing your stuff. So be patient with us as we fill in the blanks there. Joe, what are your thoughts about any of this? Is this all?
I wish I could have came.
Yeah.
Sunday.
Yeah. It was a good class.
So I don't know how there was new people in the class that hadn't been at your other class when we talked about the sons of God and the Nephilim, and I think they were like, what are you guys talking about? And
yeah.
So Genesis, what is that, 6:4, where it's talking about the sons of God, and we had the discussion on whether the sons of God are the sons of Seth, which I have real trouble buying into, because it says that the sons of God took the daughters of men as mates, and you're like, well, if it was just men, why would you say? Of course, the man's going to take females to be their wife, but if it's sons of God being fallen angels or the lesser God, little g gods, okay, then you took the daughters of man, okay, and then their offspring become the Nephilim. When the Nephilim die, there's still some spiritual energy or something that's still alive, and that's where you get the demons. That also, if you buy into that, which I do, I didn't, but if you buy into that, then the story of Noah and the why God had to end mankind, well, the bloodline was impure because the Nephilim had screwed up the bloodline. So you found these humans who were all human, and there's no impurities in their bloodstream. So God wanted to have his plan work through man and not through this impure bloodline. So there's a lot of things that if you buy into that, it to me, it answers a lot of questions.
Yeah. So there's so much, there's just so much when it comes to the subject that you're kind of talking about with the sons of God. The 40,000 foot view, really, there's a scholar I highly recommend. His name is Dr. Michael Heiser. I read his book a couple years back, and I mean, it just completely shifted and changed everything. But in Psalm 82, we'll go there. Come on, yeah, come on in. Welcome to the show here. We're getting into some weird stuff now, so strap in. Michael Heiser, his story talks about, he's a Hebrew scholar, and he was it was brought to his attention to read Psalm 82 in Hebrew by a friend of his one Sunday morning right before church. So he read it. So when he read it, it says that God's taken his place within the divine council. So he's got this council meeting. This is what we picture at the beginning of Job, where the Satan is there and God is with his what they're called sons of gods. In the midst of the little g gods, he holds judgment. Now, the reason why this would stand out in Hebrew is depending on which version you're going to read here is going to be dependent upon how they write this, the gods here. But it does say Elohim, and this is Elohim and Elohim. It is the same exact word for both of these. So in the midst of the Elohim, so Elohim has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the Elohim, he holds judgment. And then he's going to go and he's going to speak to these gods. And the point of it is that these gods, little g gods, are they're allowing corruption to take place all over the world. And he's really frustrated with this. Now, the prevalent theory behind what this psalm is talking about since like the 15th century is that the little g gods are actually just men like human kings. They all claim to be descendants of gods in this culture. Babylon, Egypt, all these guys, all the way up to Rome. Caesar Augustus, it was even called the Son of God, and so that is been the prevalent viewpoint since then. There is, however, a reemergence of this kind of more of a supernatural view, where God in His creation created both the stars in the sky and the greater light and the lesser light. That's what it says in Genesis 1. We know it as the sun and the moon. They are set in the sky for both signs and seasons, but also to have dominion up there. And then every time the stars, the sun and the moon are mentioned in Scripture, they're always personified as heavenly beings. It's important to see that, because if you just look at Genesis 1 in its own context, then you can create a different meaning behind that. Then when he creates humans and they put them on the land or on the earth to rule the land and earth, then by the time you get to the serpent in Genesis chapter 3, the Nakash is known as what we would call Satan. He is actually part of this heavenly cosmic being. I don't think there's any Christian out there that would argue that the Nakash wasn't Satan, that he wasn't some sort of a fallen angel, if that's how you see this. So when you read that in the midst of the gods, he's going to hold judgment, you got a question like, what is he talking about here? Well, now you have to go back to Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, it says that when he separated and split up the borders at Babel, when he spread out all of the world at Babel, he does this according to the number of the sons of God. I'll just pull it up here so that way you guys can see it. Deuteronomy, I think it's 15, maybe something like that. And depending on your translation, there you go. Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. So Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. I'd rather you just see it so you're not taking my word for it. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed their borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim. This is going to be used in Genesis chapter 6, when it says, in those days when men begin to multiply across the face of the earth, so that's the blessing that God gave mankind, be fruitful, multiply. So we're doing good here, right? It says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and you're immediately taken back to Eden. And you're thinking, oh, she saw the fruit, saw that it was attractive, she desired it, and she took for it, and it ended in death and chaos, right? So now you're reading this, and you see the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took for themselves any that they chose and had children with them. These are the mighty men of old, the men of renown. These are the Nephilim. This is which Nephilim is just a transliterated Hebrew word. In other words, the Hebrew author, the translators were like, I don't know what to do with this, so we're just going to sound out the words into English. Like that's what the Nephilim is. Now the Nephilim, according to this, at Babel, he split up all of them, and then he placed these sons of God, the only other place these sons of God are mentioned like this is, like I said, in Job. And it's important to look at this in the whole context, because when you go back to Job 1, you're getting a picture of now there was a day when the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Ha-Satan, the Satan, was there. Now Ha-Satan, this is another whole rabbit hole we don't have to go down right now, but this is not the devil like we call him. This is a title, the accuser, which makes sense. If you look at it like it's the devil, then you're looking at it like, okay, the Lord's giving the devil free reign to come, and you get this really choppy block of conversation where he's like, from where have you come? And the devil's like, from going to and from the earth. And then God's like, have you looked at Job? And you're like, okay, there's some stuff going on here. I'm not filled in. But if you look at it like this is a title, like the maintenance guy is at the staff meeting, and he goes, God looks at him and goes, so what have you been doing today? And you're like, checking out the building. He's like, well, have you looked at the baptistry? Whatever it may be. This suddenly fits more into place. But you're in a divine council meeting with the sons of God. Then in Deuteronomy, you see that in the sons of God, he even relays or allows these B'nai Elohim to be over different nations. In Daniel, you may recognize this as the Watchers, right? In Revelation and in Ezekiel, you may recognize them as the eyes of the Lord. Not that the Lord doesn't see everything, but the Lord partners with his cosmic heavenly beings, just like he partners with humans to go about his will. But what happens is, just like humankind falls in the garden alongside a heavenly being, the Nakash, the serpent, now you're going to see heavenly beings, sons of God, fall in Genesis chapter 6, and that's going to result in the flood. And then you're going to see the descendants of that fall at Babel, because Nimrod is known as a Gibor, as a mighty one. And he's the one who leads up the whole Babel thing. So you're seeing a pattern of cosmic rebellion, human rebellion, cosmic rebellion, human rebellion, cosmic rebellion, human rebellion. So by the time you get all the way to Sodom and Gomorrah, and you see that it's the inverse of Genesis 6, because you have two heavenly beings that go into Lot's house, and then the men of the city come in and bang down the door and want to rape them, right? Which is the inversion of Genesis 6. It's not heavenly beings wanting to rape women. It's man wanting to rape women, or men, or heavenly being. This is why, if you've never sat back and wondered why it had to be a woman, the seed of a woman, why it had to be a Virgin Mary, and why the Holy Spirit had to be the one to impregnate them, it's because that is the inversion of this whole thing, done the right way. It's presented in the King James version of it. I love it because Mary responds, "Be it unto me according to your will." Right? It's presented. It's not the Holy Spirit comes and takes, seizes, and rapes. It's presented and says, "Behold, you're going to have a child," and she's like, "Whatever you want," God, basically. So it's an undoing of all of this disaster, right? Which is also why in the Great Commission he says, "Go, therefore, go into all the nations. Go undo Babel now, teaching them, baptizing them, bring them back to the family. Behold, all power and authority in both heaven and on earth are given to me now." So these sons of God, these watchers, the fallen ones, they're nothing, right? Unfortunately, when you have a real, small view that the devil is just a fallen angel, which he is, and that demons are fallen angels, which that you kind of touched on that a little bit. That's not what Jews during the time of Jesus believed. The Jews during the time of Jesus believed that demons actually aren't fallen angels, but the offspring of the Genesis 6 thing, the half-breed human giants, basically, which makes sense because if you reread Genesis 6, you're going to see, he says, "My spirit will only dwell in man for 120 years, for he is man." If you have a divine being and an earthly being having a child, what is this child? Is it human? Is it not? And so God gives parameters, boom, right there. And then these unclean spirits, which, think about it, anything in the Old Testament that's called unclean, it's anything that has to do with death. Don't touch blood. Don't touch dead animals. Don't touch dead bodies, right? And so if you have a eternal being existing in a human body, then it's no longer a clean being, right? This heavenly being. So the death, it makes them unclean spirits. All that to say, this is a very, very deep rabbit hole that is not necessary to believe. It doesn't take away anything that Jesus did. But if you are at all interested in how we answer questions like, why are there so many gods out there outside of Christianity? Why were most cultures polytheistic? Why did all their rulers claim to be, descendants of the gods back then? I think this fills in a lot of those blanks. I think there could be nuggets of truth in this as far as whether these things literally occurred. They could also be rewritings from an Israelite point of view, sitting in Babylon, surrounded by all these this massive empire that claims to be the result of something like this, except they're rewriting it, saying, that ended in mass extinction event of all mankind. This is not a good thing. Your king that claims to be a descendant of God, that was a horrible error that took place in a cosmic rebellion and human rebellion. So in a polemical sense, all that to say is all these stories that we've read since we were children, like, slow down on them and just like begin to Psalm 1, meditate on these stories day and night, reading each of the lines, just see what they're saying. Because sometimes I think you'd be surprised at like how often do we 6 pages into the Bible read right over that little section of the sons of God. The alternate theory, I forgot to say that, is that it's the godly line of Seth, Adam and Eve's other child after Abel is born. They begin to call upon the name of the Lord in chapter 5, and so they say that basically the godly line of Seth begins to mix with the ungodly line of Cain. So that's the predominant theory in a lot of seminaries today. So there's a lot of really, really, really smart people who believe that. So take that into consideration. And
so I told you that I'm reading this book by Jonathan Cain, which is Return of the Gods. And his premise is in the 60s, when they took prayer out of the schools, it allowed God to move out and these other lesser gods to move in. His premise, Baal has moved in, and Asherah, which is Venus, and different. But those two that's as far as I've gotten in the book. But I'm almost buying into this. I know it's pretty hard to believe some of this stuff, but he's on to something, I think.
yeah,
But you said, maybe it's just a book. I don't know, but he's got some pretty good premises.
I think there can be some major fruit into not just accepting. There's this voodoo term that goes around right now. It's called like a deconstructionist. Like, I don't know if you've heard that. It's a big movement that's going on, especially in my generation of people, where they're kind of deconstructing their faith. They're basically going back to the basics and going, what have we been taught this whole time? Like, let's ignore that. Let's start back at the premise and start reading again. Now, there's some really weird, funky stuff that has come out of that. Unfortunately, it's just like, it's where you get mixtures of like a bunch of religions and more spirituality type based stuff. But I do think that there is a root. There could be a root benefit in carefully doing some of that. Not so much forgetting, because I think that it's stupid to forget all of the work and the effort and the teachings and the wisdom that has been passed down to us from church fathers and forefathers and stuff like that. It's stupid. It's ignorant to sit here and say, or prideful to sit here and say, we have come to some knowledge that none of them did. Like, that's not, I think that's not smart. But I think that not just wholly accepting everything that you've always been taught, but honestly testing some of this stuff out, like sitting back and going, okay, what do we believe about this? Do some of these things really, really matter in the church today? Or have we created mountains out of molehills, or made something that's clearly gray in scripture black and white? Unfortunately, we have, bukus of case studies where people have done that in the church, and it ends in slavery, and it ends you know, uh, uh, you know, people from authoritative positions taking advantage of lesser, you know, in the churches today and stuff. And so I think there has to be a good, healthy dose of not just because it's been taught like this for 400 years doesn't mean it's always the only potential viewpoint out there. We get stuck into our echo chambers of only what we believe. So then you kind of elevate yourself up into thinking, well, we're the real Christians, or we're the ones who know the Bible. Meanwhile, page 3 of the Bible shows us that the main issue with people is man trying to figure out things, their own interpretations of things on their own, and what that leads to, you know. And so the easy way to say it is, if it's a hot topic and it causes division and arguments and dissensions within the church bodies themselves, those are the ones that you need to go, okay, we got to step back for a minute,
Right.
because that would, you can argue all day that 7 literal days or 7 figurative days.
Right.
Smart people on either side of that realm,
Yeah.
both of those guys agree that the Bible says that Jesus prayed for our unity. You know, there's no argument against that. And so if it's going to cause division and derision, then I would say, yeah, I think we should probably sit back a little bit and go, maybe we missed the point.
Well, there are things in the Bible that are vague, and they're vague for a reason. Jesus would have never been murdered on the cross. The devil would have never let that happen if he'd have seen that was the plan. He was tricked.
Right.
I'm going to pull up. I have to.
Probably me and others. That's the one that come mind right fast.
I always go back to this, Matthew 13:10. And yes, just in case anybody wondered, I definitely just Googled this. So don't feel bad for Googling Googling whatever these. Not every pastor has an amazing brain like Jason Burton. So Matthew 10 and 11. It's Jesus. His disciples come to him and they're frustrated. They're like, Jesus, this is you're killing us. You keep speaking in these parables.
Yes.
And they're upset with him.
Right. Yeah.
And they say, why do you keep speaking to us in parables? The word is literally riddles. Like the actual word is, why do you keep teaching us in riddles and hidden things? And his answer is, to you it has been given to know the secrets, the riddles, or the hidden things of the kingdoms of heaven, but to them it's not been given. For to the one who has more will be given, the one who will have an abundance, but from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Of course, at this point, they've got to be sitting here with Jesus going, you're giving me another riddle. Like, what is happening right now? And then he hits them with this. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they don't see, and hearing they don't hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. And it says, you indeed will hear and never understand. You indeed will see, but never perceive. It's that Romans, they traded in the worship of the creator for the worship of the creature, and they're blinded to God himself. He says it in a different passage. It's this exact same thing, but where does he say it? Without wasting too much time. He says, I think it's in Luke, but he says, I speak to you in riddles because one day it will be clear to you.
Right.
Like one day these things will be revealed, will be clear. Now we have a tendency to fill it in like, okay, well, that is death, burial, and resurrection. That's when it all became clear, which most of it did. But it doesn't mean it's all clear. Hence why we have how many views of end times that people can't figure out? Like,
that's important. That was the next thing I was going to talk about, with God's view as opposed to our view on future and past events.
Yeah. One of my this is going to seem off, but I promise it ties in. One of my biggest pet peeves, period, in the world, not just the church, the world today, is when things that are theories are presented like it's ironclad fact. Like, I can't stand that. So like an easy one of that would be like evolution or the Big Bang Theory. It's just spoken about like, this is ironclad fact. You should know this. You're stupid for not knowing this is clear fact, but it's not. It's theory. Even if we had the best potential evidences, we cannot be there, so we can't prove that it was real or not, like at the end of the day. Now, where this ties in is that the church is just as bad at this. the church is just as bad at teaching something that is actually kind of a gray area as if it's ironclad fact. And what happens is at 28 years old, when I read that the rapture really wasn't an actual thing that people believed for the longest time in church history, I went, wait, what? This thing is based off of like 1 to 3 verses in all of Scripture. I had a moment of going, oh, what do I believe like right now? Because I read all of Tim LaHaye's Left Behind series and was like, I just know what's going to happen at the end of the times. But turns out it's not that clear, right? And the problem is that when it's not taught when it's not that clear, it's not taught like, hey, this is one of the prevalent thoughts or this is one of the prevalent ideas, then people who are young and malleable and don't ever test it out themselves, well, then they walk around believing stuff that may not actually be true. And when you take that down the realm of like the de-supernaturalizing the Bible, like the sons of God coming down, what does Jesus say about the end of days? He says it will be like the days of Noah. And when you read that and you read it in an unsupernaturalized view, you're going, oh, where they're all going to be partying, right? Because that's what he says. He's like, they're going to be given away in marriage. They're going to, and you're like, well, that's been all of time. They've all, Genesis chapter 2 says they came together. That wasn't days of Noah. They came together and they were married. So you have to go, well, what separates days of Noah from now and from all of the rest of history? Heavenly beings possibly showing up in the sky and raping women or genetically modifying people. And then suddenly you have an alien show up tomorrow and you go, well, I got no worldview to look at that. I'm not saying there's aliens. That's a whole conspiracy theory that we won't go down right now. But I'm just saying that as soon as you pigeonhole yourself into like these beliefs that aren't all that black and white, then it causes a lot more potential issues in the believers, which is, I think, why he followed up with that even if the elect can be deceived, they will be deceived. And let's face it, guys, we have a tendency to think Satan is really good at causing us pain and destruction and just causing chaos in our lives. Actually, what I think Jesus or Satan's greatest offense has been is to convince a whole church load of people that they're Christians, even though they don't know one single thing past the children's version stories of a Bible, right? If they can get into a church and create the most lackluster, dull, infighting, broken, segmented church, he's done a pretty good job, unfortunately. Because the world just looks at us like they can't even get along with each other, let alone with the world.
You did good with that, but that's not exactly what I was talking about. What I was talking about yesterday when you showed the man on the path and he's looking at the mountain. And
oh, yeah.
So I'm talking about God saying what's going to be in the future, and maybe it's already happened in the past. But you look at God's view of it, and he sees it completely different than that man that's on the path.
We touched on this just very, very briefly, I think, at one of the question and A's. But basically, prophecy is not based on a linear timeline, as in here's the starting point and it goes forward to the future. Prophecy is giving God's perspective outside of time, space, and matter. And so ultimately, prophecy is giving God's perspective on past, present, and future events. And so when you read an Isaiah prophecy about the coming of Jesus, it's actually talking about Babylon coming in and taking out Jerusalem. And so when you're pre-Babylon taking out Jerusalem and then Babylon comes in and takes you out, then you're going to be going, oh, Isaiah was totally right. We tested that prophet. It was right. Except in that same exact prophecy, it says, but a baby will be born. Where's the baby when they're sitting in Babylon? Is it Daniel? No. Is it Rack, Shack, and Benny? I don't think so. Like, what's happening, right? So then you're still left going, I don't understand what's happening, right? And then they're going to be he's going to be talking about the belly of the beast of Egypt and in the Exodus. And you're going, we're in Babylon. We're not in Egypt. But he's somehow speaking about the Exodus, and he's somehow speaking about Babylon, but he's also speaking about Jesus. And now we live in this time, and we understand that the kingdom will come. He will come as a ruler, which is what the Jews hung up on so much so is because Jesus came as a baby. But he didn't come and rule. So there's still a part of this prophecy that we're going, it hasn't been fulfilled yet. But we get to look back at all these past times and understand that in the future, there's still yet to be a part of this that's going to take place. And we get to have hope and all that. I have a graphic. I'll pull it up next time if you remind me. But we are at 1:00. So
So I got my questions answered and nobody else did. So I don't know if they had any or not.
That's okay. That's okay. Anything in closing?
No.
Am I fired?
I can't fire you.
Mike
I'm not-
Pedigo, you have the
I'm not
ability to
your
fire
boss,
me.
man.
You can
I
fire
ain't
me.
your boss. I ain't your boss.
Don't- My wife would probably fire me if she could. So.
Well, I can't go in there, man. That's your problem.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. If you have questions or concerns or you have no idea what we're talking about, neither do I. So it's okay.
Read your Bible.
Yeah, read your Bible. Otherwise,
How often do you do this?
every Tuesday, I guess, as long as they demand. So more people in the room helps a lot. So that's good. So otherwise, thank you guys for joining us, and I hope that you have a